Hello and welcome to my boss guide for the enemies within the level 67 dungeon, Doma Castle. Delving deep into this epic castle, we find ourselves against 3 bosses, the first of which is this Magitek Robot, the Magitek Rearguard. This boss has a multitude of mechanics you may be aware of from the previous dungeons we've done, namely lasers and avoidance patches, but also introducing a couple of new things too. Firstly, you may see an ability called Garlean Fire. This is a series of circles with direction markers on them. These indicate a series of AoEs that will spread in that direction after the first circle fades and explodes. These tell you to move from that area and not just the first AoE circle, as that area will be bombarded with more circles. Secondly, the room has robot laser weapons around the edges. These will periodically project line AoEs to avoid throughout the fight. This sums up the base mechanics for the whole fight, although the Garlean Fire AoEs will increase to 2 at a time instead of 1 towards the end of the fight, the lower the health on the boss, and the lasers will become more frequent. There are gaps between the fire AoEs that are safe, so you don't need to drastically move when this is cast towards you, allowing you to maximize your DPS without moving too drastically. Once the robot is defeated, we go deeper into the more waterlogged areas of the castle to face boss number 2. Boss number 2 is the Magitek Hexadrone. This 6-gear wheeled tank looks straight out of Final Fantasy VII or something, with the core focus of this fight once again being on line AoEs and laser beams. What would a fight be without laser beams anyway? So the first ability to look at is these robots again around the sides of the room. Much like boss 1, these project line AoEs that additionally last a little longer, and they also apply a ground AoE that you don't want to step onto. For this reason, and to avoid other mechanics, you need to move to a safe area before the lasers drop their ground AoE. This is generally a good idea. Secondly is an AoE around the boss called Circle of Death. You don't want to be in this, obviously, and melee will need to move to max hitbox range to avoid this whilst maximizing DPS. The next ability, Magitek Missiles, puts a pillar down in the room. In the later phases, it will actually be 2 pillars. These pillars must have one person at least go stand in them to reduce the damage of the missiles as they land being launched from the boss. Simply AoE heal through the remaining damage mitigated by standing in these pillars. The last mechanic is a stack marker randomly placed on a player. This player will need to come into the majority of the group, preferably melee range, to stack this damage and split it between these players. Failure to do so will likely be a death. Aside from the stack and pillars, the fight is very simple, only complicating itself when line AoEs are also up, making movement tricky. However, the pillars must take priority regardless of the line AoEs. It's always better to take damage from the line and heal it than it is to stand there and let the missiles nuke the platform. Okay, so let's move on to the last boss. This is HyperTuned Grin. This guy has seen a serious makeover from his previous failings, and now wields a powerful machine gun and chainsword type thing. It's amazing. The fight again makes use of the line AoEs from the 2 previous fights, only now they are giant spinning blades of death, which have a slightly wider line AoE to avoid. Move to the gaps to avoid the damage when they fade. Secondly, we have a marker placed on a player that needs to be taken far away from the group, preferably to the other side of the room. Once the marker fades, this player must then run over to the opposite, to where now a marker appears on the floor they just stood at. This will explode after a few seconds, doing AoE damage based on your proximity to it. The third ability is Gunsaw. This is a targeted ability on one player in particular that does damage to anyone in a direct line of fire to that player. Thus, it's important for the marked player to stand away from their party, and for the healer to top them up through the light damage it does over time before the Gunsaw phase ends. A fourth ability places red circles on players. These will need to be spread out. Stacking them will cause extra damage to others nearby. Simply take the hit and get healed through the damage. Aside from a series of different positions for the line AoEs and a different rotation of abilities, Grinwort is a fairly easy fight and should fall in no time at all, especially with his rather small health pool. Enjoy the rest of the cutscenes in your own time here, and I hope you have enjoyed this bite-sized guide onto the bosses here in Doma Castle. If you've liked the format, throw me a like below or a sub for more. Until the next video, I'll see you next time.